before the Moors stepped into Europe, before they transformed kingdoms, before they changed the world. There were the civilizations that came before them. Ancient Africa. This is the part one of the two-part series of Hidden Architects of History, the root of human story, the birthplace of science, the foundation of architecture, the origin of culture. This is the part of history the world rarely talks about, but everything begins here. Long before Europe had cities, Africa had kingdoms. Long before European scholars studied the stars, African astronomers mapped the heavens. Long before Europe built universities, Africa built libraries filled with writings on math, medicine, engineering, and philosophy. Civilizations such as Kemet, Nubia, Kush, Aksum, Carthage, Ghana, Songhai, Mali. These were not small tribes, these were nations, some with armies, some with international trade, some with architecture that still stands today. Africa mastered irrigation. Africa mastered astronomy. Africa mastered mathematics. Africa mastered city planning. Africa mastered metalwork. Africa mastered medicine. These civilizations would form the intellectual foundation that the Moors later carried into Europe. Timbuktu held libraries with hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Aksum built monolithic stone churches carved from a single piece of rock. Nubia built more pyramids than Egypt. Carthage challenged Rome with advanced naval science. Mali and Songhai held wealth so vast Europeans could not imagine it. These civilizations were respected in the ancient world. They traded across Arabia, Asia, and the Mediterranean. They were not forgotten because they were weak. They were forgotten because later nations erased their influence. The Moors did not appear suddenly. They were shaped by the brilliance of the African civilizations before them. They were the descendants of centuries of knowledge. They were the carriers of ancient wisdom. This is the beginning of their story. And now we move to the people who rose from this foundation, the Moors, before their footsteps reached foreign lands, before they changed Europe forever, before their name echoed through history. There existed a people shaped by Africa and Arabia. The world would call them the Moors. They rose from ancient African heritage. They learned from Arab scholars. They blended cultures, ideas, languages, and traditions. They were the children of warriors. They were the children of builders. They were the children of scholars. They were the children of travelers. The Moors began rising in North Africa around the late 600s AD. This region was a crossroads where African Berber tribes and Arab traders met. Knowledge flowed in both directions: science, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, language. From this fusion came a new civilization, highly intelligent, highly disciplined, highly organized. They spoke multiple languages. They studied ancient African writings and scientific works from Arabia. They preserved knowledge that Europe had long forgotten. They valued reading. They valued health. They valued architecture. They valued education. They valued teachers and scientists. They built farms in the desert. They built irrigation systems. They built cities. They built trade networks. They were not nomads, and they were builders of culture. By the early 700s AD, the Moors were strong enough to move beyond their homeland. Europe at this time was struggling. Disease, poor hygiene, limited education, weak infrastructure. Two worlds faced each other across the Mediterranean. One world rising, one world declining. The Moors crossed the water in 711 AD, and the world changed. Our story now continues in Spain. The first great influence, the first transformation, the first chapter of Moorish impact on Europe. Spain, the first great influence, 711 AD, a date that changed Europe forever. The Moors crossed the Strait of Gibraltar into Spain, not as raiders, not as destroyers, but as builders, teachers, scientists, architects. Spain was divided, cities were worn down, education was rare, medicine was primitive, hygiene was poor. Europe was entering what historians call the Dark Ages. But the Moors brought light. They entered Spain under the leadership of Tariq ibn Ziyad, a commander of African Berber heritage, a strategist, a man trained in the sciences of war and knowledge. Within a few years, the Moors controlled most of Spain, but they did not destroy the land. They rebuilt it. They created Al-Andalus, a kingdom of knowledge that would last almost 800 years. Under Moorish rule, Spain became the jewel of Europe, a center of science, a center of medicine, a center of engineering, a center of architecture, a center of culture. Let us break down exactly what the Moors brought. Medicine. The Moors built hospitals with separate wards and advanced surgical tools. They introduced anesthesia through herbal mixtures. They trained physicians who studied African and Arab medical texts. They taught hygiene and disease prevention long before Europe understood germs. European nobles traveled to Moorish Spain for treatment because their own doctors could not help them. Education. The Moors built universities that attracted scholars from Europe, Arabia, and Africa. The University of Cordoba held over 400,000 manuscripts. Some historians claim over 1 million. They taught algebra, chemistry and astronomy, geography, medicine, philosophy and agriculture, engineering. While most of Europe had only a few hundred books in some regions, the Moors had libraries larger than many cities. Architecture. They built stunning structures that still stand. The Alhambra, the Great Mosque of Cordoba, advanced aqueducts, bathhouses, irrigation systems, roads, bridges, palaces. Their architecture was mathematical, precise, geometric, spiritual, agriculture. Europe had never seen anything like it. The Moors introduced rice, citrus fruits, sugar cane, cotton, bananas, saffron, pomegranates, spinach, and advanced irrigation systems. They brought techniques that transformed Spain into one of the most fertile lands in Europe. Hygiene and daily life. Europeans rarely bathed. Many believed bathing was dangerous. The Moors bathed daily. They built public bathhouses. They used perfumes, soaps, and oils. Europe learned hygiene from the Moors. Simple truth, language and culture. Almost 4,000 Spanish words come from Arabic and African-influenced dialects. Words in science, words in math, words in agriculture, words in navigation. Spain absorbed Moorish culture deeply. This was not colonization. This was transformation. Spain became the most advanced nation in Europe because of the Moors, and their influence did not stop there. Next, they moved to Portugal. Portugal, the gateway to global exploration. Portugal was next, a land on the edge of the Atlantic, a land that would one day create explorers who circled the world. But before Portugal could sail anywhere, it needed knowledge, navigation, astronomy, mathematics, ship design, and the people who taught them were the Moors. For centuries, Portugal existed under heavy Moorish presence. Moorish scientists taught map-making. Moorish astronomers taught star navigation. Moorish mathematicians taught geometry used for shipbuilding. Many of Portugal's early explorers studied under schools influenced by Moorish knowledge. The magnetic compass, astrolabe improvements, star charts, wind patterns, ocean currents. Much of this came from Moorish science. Even the famous Henry the Navigator used knowledge collected from Moorish scholars and African sailors. European exploration relied on African and Moorish science, but history books never gave credit. Portugal absorbed Moorish architecture as well. Castle designs, fortress engineering, irrigation systems, agricultural techniques, all influenced by the Moors. Their presence shaped Portuguese culture, language, and science for centuries. And this Moorish influence helped push Europe into the age of exploration. Next, we move to a region often forgotten in the story, southern France, the influence that continued without conquest. France, a land the Moors never fully conquered, yet southern France still felt their influence, not through war, but through proximity, through trade, through culture, through contact with Spain. Civilizations do not need borders to influence each other. Knowledge crosses mountains, ideas travel beyond walls. Truth does not need permission to spread. And southern France absorbed Moorish science in ways most people never learned. During the height of Moorish Spain, scholars from France traveled south to study in Cordoba and Toledo. They returned home with new ideas that France had never seen before. Mathematics, medicine, agriculture, architecture, philosophy, navigation. These ideas entered southern France and spread. French monasteries and universities began translating Moorish texts into Latin. Entire libraries were filled with Arabic scientific works. Many French scholars became messengers who carried Moorish knowledge throughout Europe. They did not conquer the land, but they conquered the mind. In southern France, you can still see Moorish influence in certain architectural designs: archways, tiled mosaics, irrigation methods, garden layouts. Even the troubadour tradition in medieval France, poetry, music, philosophical love songs, was shaped by Moorish Andalusian culture. It was not a small influence. It was foundational. France did not need Moorish armies to feel their impact. Knowledge travels further than soldiers. Next, we move to the land where Moorish presence was stronger: Sicily and Italy, the heart of architecture and medicine. Italy is known as the birthplace of the Renaissance, a period of art, science, medicine, engineering, mathematical revival. But most people never learn where much of that revival came from. It came from the Moors. Sicily was under Moorish rule for over 200 years. During this time, they transformed the island into a center of science and agriculture. They introduced advanced irrigation systems. They expanded citrus farming. They built architectural designs with complex patterns and arches. They taught medicine and astronomy. When the Normans conquered Sicily, they kept the Moorish scientists. They valued their knowledge too much to remove them. These same scholars helped spark the Italian Renaissance. Italian architects studied Moorish geometry. Italian doctors studied Moorish medical texts. Italian map makers used Moorish star charts. Italian scholars studied algebra and chemistry from Moorish manuscripts. The influence was deep. It was undeniable. Even today, Sicilian buildings show clear Moorish influence: domes, arch windows, intricate tile work, gardens formed with Islamic African design. Italy's mathematical awakening came partly from African and Arab scholarship preserved by the Moors. The famous Fibonacci, known for the Fibonacci sequence, learned Hindu-Arabic numerals from scholars who preserved them during Moorish rule. This single mathematical system changed Europe forever. The Moors did not simply touch Italy, they shaped it. Their influence helped birth the Renaissance itself. And now we continue deeper into the regions where Africa and Arabia connected on a spiritual and intellectual level. Next is Arabia and the Middle East. Arabia and the Middle East, the shared knowledge of civilizations. When people think about Africa and Arabia, they often imagine two separate worlds, two separate histories, two separate cultures. But the truth is simple. Africa and Arabia have been connected since ancient times, through trade, through marriage, through scholarship, through religion, through migration. And the Moors were a product of this connection. Long before the Moors entered Europe, African scholars traveled into Arabia. They brought mathematics, they brought medicine, they brought astronomical charts, they brought agricultural techniques. Arab scholars also traveled into Africa, carrying their own knowledge. The exchange was constant. The Middle East was influenced by African civilizations such as Kemet, Nubia, Aksum, Ghana, Songhai. Ideas flowed like trade routes. This fusion created a powerful scientific foundation, a foundation that the Moors carried into Europe, a foundation built by both Africans and Arabs. Their combined knowledge shaped navigation medicine, algebra chemistry, engineering architecture astronomy. This shared wisdom traveled across the seas and deserts. Even early Islamic architecture in Arabia was influenced by African builders. Mosques in the Middle East show patterns found in Nubia and Egypt. African scholars helped preserve Greek and Persian texts. They expanded on them with new discoveries. This was not borrowing, this was collaboration. Through Africa and Arabia working together, a scientific powerhouse formed, a powerhouse that Europe would learn from for centuries. And in one place, Africa's influence was not only scientific, it was royal. This takes us to India. India, the African kings who changed a nation. Few people know this part of history because it was buried, hidden, ignored. But the truth stands tall. Africa ruled parts of India. African warriors known as the Siddhis or Habshis rose to power in India. Some arrived as soldiers, some as captives who earned their freedom, some as elite guards. Their skill and discipline impressed Indian rulers. Over time, many Africans gained high military rank and political power, and one of them became a king, Malik Ambar, a brilliant African leader from Ethiopia. Malik Ambar rose from servitude to become the ruler of the Ahmadnagar Sultanate. He built armies, he built fortresses, he led military campaigns that stopped powerful Mughal forces. He became one of the most respected and feared leaders in Indian history. His military tactics, especially guerrilla warfare, influenced Indian warfare for generations. He introduced advanced water management systems. He revolutionized city planning. He protected local populations. He resisted foreign powers. This was not a minor figure. This was an African king who shaped the destiny of India. And he was not the only African leader. Other Africans held positions as governors, admirals, commanders, nobles, and ministers in India's courts. Their contributions included fort construction, agriculture, city development, defense systems, political reforms. Indian artwork and coins still show African leaders from this era. They were not erased locally, but the West erased them from the global story. Africa did not only influence Europe, Africa helped shape India itself. And next we step into the chapter that shocks most people. Africa did not just influence the Roman Empire, it ruled it. Rome, the African emperors who ruled an empire. Rome, the empire that shaped Western civilization, the empire that ruled continents, the empire that stood for power, law, architecture, and war. People learn about Julius Caesar, they learn about Augustus, they learn about Nero and Constantine, but they do not learn this. Rome had African emperors, real emperors, not minor rulers, not temporary figures, powerful men who controlled armies, wealth, and government. This part of history was erased on purpose, but the truth still stands. The most famous African emperor of Rome was Septimius Severus, born in Leptis Magna in North Africa, a city rich in African architecture, trade, engineering, and culture. He rose through the ranks of the Roman military. He gained the loyalty of legions. He defeated rivals. He became emperor in the year 193 AD. He ruled until 211 AD. He rebuilt Rome. He strengthened its armies. He expanded its borders. He stabilized its economy. He was one of the greatest emperors in Roman history. But this is not what people are taught, because it changes everything the world thinks it knows about Africa. The African royal family. Severus married Julia Domna from Syria. Their children, Caracalla and Geta, became emperors too. This means Rome's ruling family for multiple generations had African and Middle Eastern heritage. This is documented by Roman historians themselves. Not modern speculation, not rumor, recorded history. Yet it was erased from textbooks. Because if the world knew Africa ruled Rome, it would destroy the lie that Africa contributed nothing. African generals and officials. Under Severus, many Africans rose to power in Rome. Generals, commanders, advisors, political officers. Severus expanded opportunities for Africans in the Roman military. Some commanded entire legions. Some governed provinces. Some controlled trade networks and tax systems. Rome became deeply connected to Africa during his rule. Rome's strength was tied to Africa more than people ever realized. Architecture and city building. Severus rebuilt Leptis Magna with African and Roman engineering combined. He built arches, marketplaces, palaces, public squares. His architecture is still standing today. Massive, detailed, beautiful. In Rome, he restored monuments and expanded the Forum. He infused African design principles into Roman stonework. African influence was carved into the heart of Rome. Military reform. Severus changed the Roman army. He increased pay, improved training, expanded recruitment, hired more African and Middle Eastern soldiers known for strength and discipline. His reforms kept Rome powerful long after his death. Many historians believe Rome might have collapsed earlier without him. Africa did not weaken Rome. Africa saved it. Why this history was erased? During the Renaissance and later during European colonization, there was a major rewriting of history. Europe did not want to teach that Africans once ruled Europe, so they removed African emperors from school books. They softened their descriptions, they changed their artwork, they lightened their features in paintings, they buried the truth. But the ruins of Leptis Magna remain, the Roman writings remain, the statues remain, the coins remain, the evidence is everywhere. Rome was not purely European. Rome was multicultural. Rome was influenced by Africa. Rome was ruled by Africa. This is the part of history the world can no longer hide. And next we step far back in time before Rome. Before Europe, before Arabia, into the age of ice and migration, this leads us to the story of how humans traveled the world long before ships existed, the Ice Age. Stay tuned for part 2 to explore the ancient civilizations even deeper. Meanwhile, explore other videos on the channel and subscribe so that you don't miss part 2.